Well, hi there. So in this video, which is the last of the three or the four videos that are extra practice about Monopoly, we're going to spend time looking at the regulations associated with monopolies. And just as a review, the Monopoly modules were 61, 62, and 63. And I know we're skipping ahead quite a bit here, but this is how we deal with market failures. So we're kind of including it here. The first check your understanding question is kind of not really germane to our class. So we're going to rule that one out. You don't really need to know specific information about antitrust law for this class. So there's questions that appear about that. If there's anything about the Sherman Act or the Clayton Antitrust Act, you don't really have to know those for AP Microeconomics. Now, the question here, number 2, says the FYI in this module talks about regulators setting prices for wind energy on the basis of average costs. That means demand equals the average total cost curve. Explain why those who don't want to pay subsidies would choose that over marginal cost. So demand equals average total cost in average cost pricing. Demand equals marginal cost in marginal cost pricing. And the reason why is actually easier to understand with a graph. So we have price and quantity, and if you have a natural monopoly with these types of services, if you had a downward sloping marginal cost curve, and then you have a downward sloping ATC curve, the point that occurs here is the average cost pricing point. That's the break even, right? That's the break even. And the firm, if they're regulated to marginal cost pricing, marginal cost pricing, that's the optimal, right? Now, if they were to price at the optimal all the way down here and force them through a price ceiling to produce down here, well, then the average cost of producing those units is above it, and they would actually have a loss. And so they would lose money if they actually are producing at that optimal level. So often, rather than do that, they'll often kind of choose to regulate to the break-even price. Although even though they're doing that, they're still leaving a little bit of deadweight loss. It would be kind of this area, then the firm isn't losing money. And again, the reason why they would prefer this break-even price if they're regulating them would be that if they push them all the way down to the optimal price, then the firm's losing money, and then they would have to subsidize them. And so rather than do that, they just kind of opt for a middle ground of saying, well, the break-even price is better than what they would if they were profit maximizing. Because of course, if they were profit maximizing, MR equals MC here, and their price would be up here on the demand curve. So the firm, like if they were doing profit maximizing, would even be higher. So this is the profit maximizing price. If we left them to their own devices, of course, we could push them out just a little bit and get a little bit more quantity as well and a lower price with break even, but we wouldn't want to move all the way over to optimal, even though we're leaving some deadweight loss here, is because we would have to subsidize them. Now, the last part is actually the free response question here. This is the first free response question, and I think it's better than the second one. The second one asks for policy options, which again are not very valuable for our course. So it says draw and label a natural monopoly, and then it gives you some specifics about how they would want that thing labeled. So demand downward sloping, marginal revenue, and then coming down marginal cost, coming down ATC. And it says label the price and quantity if they're unregulated as P0 or PU and QU. So MR equals MC here, then at QU, and we go all the way up here to the demand curve to find PU, the unregulated price. Then it says shade and label consumer surplus if unregulated. Well, if they're unregulated, the price up to the demand curve tells us the consumer surplus. So the area up here above the price up to the demand curve is consumer surplus. Label the lowest price regulators could expect the monopoly to maintain in the long run and use PR and QR for that. Well, if we maintained it in the long run, that would be like the break-even point. Because any lower than this price, we'll label that, they said PR, any lower than that price, PR, and the firm's losing money. So this is our break-even price that we could regulate them to. And then this is their break-even quantity that we can regulate them to that corresponds to where demand equals average total cost. What happens to the size of the consumer surplus when the firm is required to charge PR rather than PU? Well, it would get bigger, right? It would include all of this area underneath this triangle going down to PR. So we would say for D, it gets bigger. That's the answer. And then E, what happens to the firm's profit if regulated to PR? Well, it gets smaller, and we could say profit equals 0 because demand equals ATC, price equals the ATC. So they're breaking even if we actually regulate them to that price. All right, let's take a look at these multiple choice questions. The first one, the Sherman Antitrust Act, you don't have to know it. We're ruling that one out. That won't show up on quizzes. A natural monopoly exists when over the relevant range, increasing output results in a lower average total cost. So we know that you've got demand and then marginal revenue. we have this decreasing marginal cost and decreasing average total cost. The decreasing average total cost is actually why this is called a natural monopoly. What's the most common policy approach to them? It's price regulation. Most of the time, we have public service utilities commissions that basically tell utilities this is the maximum price you can charge. And what they often try to do is find the average cost. What's the average cost of making electricity? And then that's the maximum price that the firm is allowed to choose. So price regulation is pretty common. We sometimes have public ownership, which is another option, but it's not the most common policy response. This last one here says, without government intervention, a monopolist will produce how many units and charge what price? Well, they produce where MR equals MC. So we know they're going to produce Q2. And so we'll say Q2. And then the price is up on the demand curve. So they charge P1. And so Q2 P1 is C. The lowest regulated price the government could expect the monopolist to maintain, well, that's the break even. And so that occurs here. And that price is P3. So I look here and I go, that's also answer C. So hopefully this helped you with Module 77. I'll see you next time.